detail. You want to raise your right hand?
You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God?
I do.
Thank you. Would you please state and spell your first and last name for the record, please?
Dominic, D-O-M-I-N-I-C, Gentile, G-E-N-T-I-L-E.
Thank you.
Mr. Gentile, you're an attorney with the law firm of Ford & Silver,
Yes.
and you represent John Linetti in this civil lawsuit.
Yes.
Prior to John Linetti becoming a defendant in this lawsuit, I contacted you on behalf of Virgin Valley Water District, correct?
Yes.
When I contacted you, we discussed possible settlement of the Virgin Valley Water District's claims against Mr. Linetti, correct?
I don't know that we discussed that. I know that that's what you wanted. We did talk about the lawsuit and how to avoid it.
When you say the lawsuit, you're talking about this civil lawsuit,
The
right?
civil lawsuit before it was filed.
And that was in June of 2011, correct?
Probably.
My records show that we discussed that on June 17th, 2011. Do you have any reason to dispute that it was June 17th that we discussed that?
I probably have my own billing records that would reflect that. I can't be sure of the accuracy of yours, but I can be sure of the accuracy of mine.
Do you have any reason to believe that it wasn't June 17th, 2011 that we discussed that?
No, I don't have any reason to believe what day it was.
Okay.
That's why I said it was probably in June.
Okay. And part of what we discussed included the civil litigation and the criminal litigation, or the criminal action, correct?
Well, there wasn't any criminal action. So we probably didn't discuss a criminal action. It was a grand jury investigation.
Okay. And there was a criminal complaint filed, correct?
Not against Mr. Linetti.
No, and I'm not stating Mr. Linetti specifically, but you are aware of the criminal action that's running parallel to the civil case.
I was made aware of the fact that a civil complaint had been filed against Mr. Winters, Mr. Kochi, and Mr. Johnson.
Okay.
That's what I first learned. Then I learned that it became an indictment against those people.
Okay. So at the time we had a discussion, which was sometime in June 2011, we discussed the claims that Virgin Valley Water District had against Mr. Linetti, but we also discussed that ongoing criminal investigation or grand jury indictment that you just described, correct?
I mean, I don't really recall discussing the you know, you could be right. I'm not saying that you're incorrect. I just really don't remember that.
Okay. Do you recall that we discussed the possible interaction between the criminal action that may be forthcoming if it hadn't already existed at that point and the civil action, and that maybe your client would possibly want to stay out of the civil lawsuit because it might impact the criminal lawsuit? Do you recall a discussion like that?
No, I'll tell you what I do recall if you want to know.
Okay. About that discussion?
I can tell you what I recall about that discussion. Is that what you'd like?
Yeah.
Okay. I recall that I had already been in communication with Mark DiGiacomo, who testified in this matter, and there was piloting the ongoing grand jury investigation. I recall that you later contacted me, quite a bit later, at least a couple of weeks later.
What date are you starting from, just so that
I spoke to Mark DiGiacomo probably the first couple of days of June. And I didn't speak to you, if you're correct, I didn't speak to you until the 17th of June. So there was at least a couple of weeks in which I was focusing on the grand jury investigation and Mr. DiGiacomo's desire to speak with Mr. Linetti. That's what I recall. And I recall that Mr. DiGiacomo wanted to give Mr. Linetti what's called a proffer letter. And Mr. Linetti really didn't need a proffer letter. And so I was concerned with whether Mr. Linetti did in fact, after I talked to you, I was concerned that if Mr. Linetti was going to be sued, whether a proffer letter and the fact that he was given limited immunity under it might work adversely to him in a civil case if it ever happened. That's what I remember.
And so that was after your discussion with Mark DiGiacomo and then after your discussion with me, correct?
It may have, it was definitely after my discussion with Mark DiGiacomo, and it must have been either during or immediately after my first discussion with you, because otherwise I wouldn't have had any idea that there was going to be a civil action, or might be a civil action, I should say.
I also sent you a copy of the amended complaint that had been prepared that I had mentioned to you might be filed against your client if the issues weren't resolved. Do you recall that?
I do recall receiving that later.
Do you recall whether that was June 23rd?
I think it was. I think it was a couple of days after I spoke to George Banish.
Okay.
Met with George Banish.
Your meeting with George Banish was after you and I had already discussed what you just described, correct? When you and I had discussed and these things maybe went off in your mind about civil and criminal, that meeting with George Banish was after your discussion with me.
The meeting with George Banish was after my discussion, my first telephonic discussion with you.
Okay. And the telephonic discussion you described that you and I had, that was our first telephonic discussion that you can recall, correct?
Yeah, actually, I thought you were Clark Bingham, but you're not.